Hey, everybody, and welcome back to the Cinefile, the podcast celebrating cinema one film at a time. Each week, my co-host Jake Biller and I break down a film, discussing anything from mise en scène to scenes you missed. Today, we talk about how sometimes the things you can't see may be scarier than the things you can. In 2020's Invisible Man, or The Invisible Man. This is the third of our four weeks of the Spooky Cinefile, and it was my pick this week. And it's I'm glad I picked it. It's a good one.
It is good.
It's one of those. I know I've talked about this before, but my kind of measuring stick as to if I'm going to buy a movie or not usually happens when I'm watching the film. About halfway through, I kind of determine, okay, is this worth a buy or not? And I was watching The Invisible Man, and halfway through, I'm like, wow, I'm really glad I bought this. Because from the jump, you can tell that the production value is incredible.
Mm-hmm. No, definitely. It's very well executed. It's very intentional, which I always appreciate. It's very well. It um has a clear goal, a clear focus, and it's very well executed. So I appreciated that. I had not seen this until this re or until this
Till this
episode.
rewatch of the
Rewatch.
first time I watched.
Rewatch something I've never seen, so it's never mind. I don't know where my brain's at. But yeah, I found this really interesting. I felt like this was an uh interesting take, and especially like in this series, we've kind of hit so far hit a horror movie from each one that we've done has been from a different generation, right? We did Halloween the
Right.
first time from the 70s and the like kind of the beginning of slasher films, and then we did Dracula last week, which goes back to like really kind of the inception of horror films in classic Hollywood cinema. So now doing a very recent take, I find it really interesting to just kind of, in my mind, I'm watching this and I'm kind of noticing some of the strands, if you will, that kind of tie all these together, but yet how they built upon each other and how they've kind of evolved. I find that really interesting.
Yeah, I these are three very different films, but are similar in some ways. Obviously, The Invisible Man is a property that Universal has had for almost a century.
Mhm.
And so that the first Invisible Man kind of came out in that same generation as Dracula in the
Right.
30s. So it's really interesting to see how they've modernized it. And honestly, I think it was incredibly effective. Like having watched this and now kind of refreshing right on this rewatch what I think of it, I think it's a very sophisticated horror movie. I
Mhm.
know we talked, I believe it was last week. Yeah, it was last week about the Dark Universe.
Yeah.
Back in, I think it was like 2017, Universal wanted to do what everybody else was doing and make their own cinematic universe, but wanted it to be on their monster movie properties that they had kind of introduced in the 20s and 30s. And it obviously floundered. And this is the first, if I'm not mistaken, this is kind of the first film after the floundering of the Dark Universe that involves a character that was going to be a part of the Dark Universe. And I think that the way in which this movie is made, the production value, the way they tell the story, and I mean, there's so much suspense in this.
Mhm.
This honestly is an interesting jumping off point if they would have taken this and said, okay, we're going to do a monster universe based on this like milieu, like the way in which this film looks, the way in which they approach the story. If they were to take that and make a universe out of it, I mean, look, this is a low budget film. This is a Blumhouse production. They usually film them for pretty cheap, and a lot of times horror, you can actually get a lot of money in return.
Mhm.
So this is in the Jason Blum pipeline, if you will, and I think it's a great starting off point. They obviously have not done that. I still think there is an ability to do that. But one of the things that you texted me that really stood out is you said, "Hey, like this movie, there's some twists."
Oh yeah, for sure. It definitely keeps you on your toes. Reading up about it, it's interesting that people were kind of disappointed in the trailer because they felt like it gave too much of the story away. But
Interesting.
I feel like, because I remember seeing this trailer, I remember seeing this and being like, I don't like scary movies, but that kind of looks good. I didn't end up seeing it at the time because 2020 happened.
Yeah, it
Um,
was COVID, and I would like to say this is my apology tour. Last week I said it was 2018. Um, I was wrong. I'm sorry. I want to ask for your forgiveness. It was
it's you.
unacceptable.
You're the problem.
I am the problem, and I'm gonna make myself the solution by saying right now that it was my fault. Anyway,
Um, what was I going with this? Oh, the
you're like
trailer. I was like, okay,
you're
that
like okay,
happened.
that was stupid.
I didn't say that, you did. But no,
Does
people
not
felt
deny.
like this people thought this trailer gave too much away, but having seen it, I'm like, no, it sets you up for like really kind of like the perfect sucker punch in a way, but like in a good way. Like it sets you up for the haymaker of like the reveal of this movie that this isn't just another like supernatural monster movie in a way. Like this. Okay, we talk spoilers on the full reviews.
Yeah. This
Yeah,
movie's been out for 3 years, and also it was released right before the pandemic. So
yes.
if you wanted to see it, you probably watched it at home.
It sets you up to be like, oh, like this is like a ghost or like a spirit or something that's there but is invisible in this supernatural way. But then we find out no, it's actually a guy in a suit,
Right.
which is like a completely different twist than everything that this sets you up for. Like the movie, the trailer, the really the first act and a half. I really think the first half of this movie like sets you up to be like, oh, like this is some like supernatural thing. And no, this is real in a way.
Yeah. The way in which the story is told is almost a masterclass in subverting expectations
Yeah.
in a way. Look at it. Obviously, I had seen this before, so I knew it was a man in a suit. But you're absolutely right. We have this slow buildup of okay. At first, it's like these kind of weird things that are happening. Right? She goes and she leaves the stove on. Which rule number one: when you're cooking something like bacon and you've got all of that grease, you don't leave. You don't leave the stove, especially when it's gas. Anyway, just don't do that. But she leaves, and then you hear the little bit of a click, and uh the burner increases. Or the fact that you saw the she opened up her portfolio and nothing was in there. So you get these small moments,
Mm-hmm.
and it kind of has this gradual build up to then you see okay the pictures are being taken, so okay somebody on this plane of existence has to be doing this because you can't, like, a ghost can't handle a phone.
Yeah.
Or maybe well, is that what ghosting is?
Let's not get into that.
No, it probably shouldn't.
We've
uh
been both ghosted enough. But
yeah.
this is not the trauma file. This is the cinephile.
He said like zoinks, like Scooby-Doo. Anyway, it's so we have this slow build up, and then you finally start to see when she and her sister go to a family style Japanese restaurant. Interesting. He
Sure.
was really right when he said that this is a little bit different.
Yeah.
And her throat is slit
Yeah.
and goes into her the knife goes into her hand. These kind of slow gradual buildup. And so I
Mm-hmm.
think it's really interesting because we from the jump know something's amiss, but we don't know exactly what it is. And so we have this opportunity to look at it from a supernatural point of view or from a technological point of view. And so part of the buildup of this film is learning, okay, what exactly is going on? Because as I texted you, this movie is like Gaslight the movie, except Gaslight was already a movie from what, like 1941?
There's two. There's one in the late, I think there's two. There's one in the late 30s.
It's like 38 or something.
Yeah, it's like 38 and then 41, which remakes happened quick back then. Basically, if they're like, oh, we can do it better, even if it's 5 years later. The one with Ingrid Bergman is what kind of
And Angela
is,
Lansbury, that was her first
yeah,
role.
I forgot Angela Lansbury's in that as well. It's based on a stage play. And I think technically people say, well, it came from the stage play, but it became popular because of the movie. It's called Gaslight. If we haven't said that yet, but it's like that's where the term gaslighting comes from, because it's all like, no, like you're just crazy, like that's not how it is, like you're just making this up, when in fact they are right. The character being gaslit is 100% right.
And that has become a whole genre.
Yeah.
That's become a whole genre. And it does this thing because there's a difference between horror films and thriller films. And I will die on this hill. So many people say, Invisible Man, that's a horror film. It's not a horror film. It's a thriller film. They're two different types of films. Mm-hmm. So when we talk about a thriller film, we're talking about something that gives you a visceral reaction, right? When you watched this movie, and I'm sure Jake felt the same way, you were kind of on edge. Mm-hmm. There were definitely certain points where you were unsure of what was going to happen. But I think the biggest thing, especially in this film and other Gaslight films, we'll call them, is that you know that she's right. And there's the frustration that nobody else sees it.
Yeah.
But also the understanding that there's nothing she can do. So you feel trapped.
Yeah.
So I was in my room watching this, right? But I felt trapped in this little box because I knew there's no way she can prove, or at the time with the information I had, there's no way that she could prove that she was right, but she was. Right. That is what a thriller really is. It's making you question reality sometimes, but in a lot of senses, it's that physical reaction, that feeling that you get. And horror, a lot of times, on the opposite end, and then Jake, I'll let you talk. Horror on the opposite end really indulges, I think, in especially slasher, but really indulges in violence. Mm-hmm. And so you get a different kind of reaction from that, because it's not a feeling of being trapped. It's a feeling, almost maybe of disgust, or jump scare, right? But being afraid is different than feeling trapped.
Yeah. It's kind of like going back to what we talked about with Halloween. It's about manipulating, your senses to elicit reaction is kind of the, base, I guess you could say, like, goal of a horror film. And I think thriller films to an extent too, but thriller films, I feel like, are more, they want to get in your head more than they want to get in, like, your just like nervous system, if you will, right? They don't want to overwhelm your senses necessarily. They want you to become frustrated, to feel that feeling of being trapped, like the characters in the movie, and being scared of what can happen, but ultimately, like, you're scared of, like, you understand what's happening, but there's no way you can stop it,
right?
In a way,
exactly.
So I think that's really interesting. Also, another thing I wanted to touch on, especially when it comes to looking back at Dracula and comparing it to this, is, and I think it's an apt comparison, because, like we talked about, this is kind of, it really has no connection other than, like, the idea of the original, The Invisible Man. Like, there's no real other connection to the story, but except for, like, kind of the large scale idea of being tormented by someone who's invisible. But with classic monster movies and, like, that kind of vein of horror, there is a supernatural quality that lends itself to the terror of the movie, I think. There's a
Okay.
supernatural quality of like, and even in Halloween, there's uh, a supernatural in a way quality to Michael Myers. Now we get very little hints of it. It's not as overt as Dracula. Dracula, very early on, you understand like this is not real.
Right.
And with Michael
I'll
Myers,
never
like
forget watching a bat drive
a
drive
carriage,
horses,
yes.
drive a carriage.
But I mean, even to go to Halloween with Michael Myers, like he's a real person, but there are little things that are like this. This isn't 100% real. Like when he gets shot and falls off the balcony, and then they go look for the body like 30 seconds later, and dude is gone. Like a
Yeah.
real person doesn't survive that. So like there's and like Halloween, the rest of the franchise kind of plays into
Delves into
yeah,
the supernatural. Yeah.
right. But boiling it down, what I get to is those are horror to me, or more true horror, because they have a supernatural quality, and the fear comes from this is not this can't be really understood. This can't be rationalized. This can't be explained in a rational human explanation, right? And that's
Right.
very much how this movie begins. You're like you know that there's an invisible person there that's tormenting what's even her character, Ceceila.
Ceceila.
I couldn't remember her name. There's a physical presence there tormenting Ceceila that people just can't see, and so it has that supernatural quality to it. But when it's revealed that it's a person in the suit, I think that's when this makes the twist from horror to thriller. And then you think back on the movie, and that's why I would say I would agree, this is more of a thriller. It leans more towards thriller than horror. It definitely leans into those horror tropes and those horror, what we understand horror to be. But
Sure.
like you said, it subverts those. It subverts that expectation of like, oh, this is a horror movie. I'm just going to watch her get tormented for 2 hours and not be able to explain this in a human, rational way. But then we make that twist when we realize it's actually a person in the suit, and it really kind of changes your view on the whole film, I think, because then it's not so much a fight for survival. It's a good versus evil kind of struggle, I think. It's a hero versus the villain.
Yeah.
Once it's revealed that like it's another person, so it almost levels the playing field in a way, I feel like
Sure.
uh
That
Jamie Lee
he,
Curtis fighting against uh a um a supernatural Michael Myers is about Jamie Lee Curtis surviving and not getting those two kids she's watching killed. She's not
right.
trying to defeat Michael Myers. In this movie, Cecelia is trying to survive, but also prove that she's not insane and that there really is someone tormenting her. But then once she realizes who that is, it's almost like an adversarial kind of dynamic to it, I think, and it takes on a different aspect. And I think that also kind of lends itself to, it's still a fight for survival, but it's the playing field feels a little more leveled.
Right. When you realize that the Invisible Man character Adrian is fallible or
Mhm.
fallible, somebody that has weakness,
Yeah.
then that changes the dynamic. But what's really interesting is you mentioned at the beginning of the pod today that these are three different generations of horror movies. And if you look at it, there is a trajectory that kind of ties all of these together.
Mhm.
And that is, we get less and less supernatural
Yeah.
with every iteration, with every generation. So with Dracula, very clearly supernatural. We see the bats, we see the wolf. Still, if you
Yes.
haven't watched that episode on Dracula, we have a whole discussion on that. We talk about Halloween, and it's definitely more realistic, right? There's definitely
Mhm.
that toe that dips into reality of a kid that's 17 or however old Jamie Lee Curtis is, taking care, having a babysitter, but also that supernatural element. And then we have this film that by the end is grounded in reality.
Yeah.
It starts off maybe a little bit more supernatural, but I think it's very interesting that each generation approaches horror in a different way. And we've slowly gone from the supernatural to the realistic. And I think that also kind of, it also is a commentary, I think, on the way each generation kind of views itself.
Mm-hmm.
The more you know about something, the less supernatural it becomes and the more natural it becomes.
Yeah.
Right. In one of the Avengers movies, one of the Thor movies, Thor talks about how Asgard is not magical. It's just a technology that we as humans don't understand.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I'm trying to get at here. In the
Yeah.
30s, what was actually technological, but we didn't understand, or something like that, compared to the 70s, what was actually technological compared to what we don't understand, to today, what's actually technological compared to what we don't understand. It's each one is different.
Yeah.
And as we've grown and learned more, specifically in the realm of science and
Mm-hmm.
technology, the less and less supernatural these films have become.
Right.
But
And
I think that's a very interesting take.
yeah, and I think, to put it on a larger scale, I think it kind of, that progression kind of mirrors the progression of, I would say, just filmmaking as a whole. We start with very kind of, um look at, some of the earliest movies is it's the Lumiere
Trip to the
brothers.
Moon.
Yeah, the Trip to the Moon. That is full on just like wackadoodle
That's a
supernatural.
dank meme. That's a dank
Yeah.
meme today.
But
He
then,
said all the wizards instead of
yes,
scientists, they all like a hat.
exactly.
They're
But I mean,
clowning, man.
you know what I mean? It's like it goes from such a supernatural place, and that's like early, you have, I feel like fantasy is very like key to like early fantasy and adventure is very, very
Sure.
intertwined with early Hollywood. And then we each generation of filmmakers comes, it seems like we add more and more realism. And yes, there are exceptions to every rule. And there are people that are still making like really leaning into supernatural things today that, and they're still making very good films. So I'm not saying like to make better films, you need to be more realistic. But I think if you kind of take a step back,
That would be Italian neorealism.
yes.
Yes.
But if you take a step back and look at the trajectory and trends across genres that each generation of filmmakers has made, I would say that it's pretty clear that we have tended more and more towards realism and made a step with every generation of filmmakers.
Yeah, I think that's apt. I think you're absolutely correct. One of the things that is very noticeable when it comes to filmmakers and taking steps forward is the way this film was shot.
Yeah.
This film, one of the coolest things, and I remember watching this with my roommate Daniel. When it came out, so in 2020 or maybe 2021, I remember watching it with him, and I said I loved the way the camera moved, but I also loved how it was shot as if there was a person actually there.
Yes.
Now, Jake, you're the camera expert out of the two of us. You want to break that down a little bit? I know you have some thoughts.
Yeah, I think that's just the brilliance of this movie is the way the way things are framed. There's two I don't want to call them tropes, two techniques used that really stuck out to me. One of them is it makes you feel like there's a lot of shots that make you feel like you're like peeking around a corner or like hiding behind something and observing Ceceila and other characters. There's a number of shots, and especially notice this early on in the movie, where it's like peeking around from corners, or it's like you'll see like down a hallway that she's doing something, and instead of like being in the room with her, you're like kind of removed from it, but like in the same way that like a predator or a stalker would be like observing their victim before they attack. which I feel like is really interesting. But also, like you pointed out, the way this is shot to make it feel like another person is there. Reading up on some of the techniques, it really fascinated me. The director talking about how they used a lot of very like new school techniques and a lot of old school techniques to create the Invisible Man. You know, new school being like they had an actor, and oftentimes it was Oliver Jackson-Cohen, the guy who plays Adrian, was in the suit to give
Okay.
Elizabeth Moss someone to act off of. And
Because
so
it would be almost impossible
yeah,
for
that would
her
have been
to give the performance she did if nobody else was in that
yeah,
room.
that would have been an incredible piece of acting if that was the case. And it's still, I think, a very good performance. Don't get me wrong, but like that's like next level to do that without anyone to act
Yeah, that's
off
Meryl
of.
Streep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But anyways, we have techniques like that where it's, you know, a person in a suit, and then they had some very old school techniques of like, you know, when they shot the original Invisible Man, of like you hide a guy in a cupboard and he pulls a string to like make a door move or something like that,
Sure.
which I find very interesting. But, you know, shooting this in a way that, you know, they had that person in the green suit so they could like frame this in a way that is organic to say, there's another person here. And this sounds really like theoretical and like very like heady and ethereal, but it's really not. I think really the layman audience picks up on this right away because it's made so clear. Because we consume so much media, we understand like basic laws of like framing techniques and rules of thirds and like look space. You know, we notice when things feel awkward, or they feel like they're shot wrong without, even if we can't back it up with the language that, you know, a cinematographer would be able to. But it uses those things to suggest like there's another person here. It uses those techniques to be like, there's a lot of empty space. We know that, you know, from the title, you know that there is going to be an invisible man, like that. You can't separate that. You
Right.
know,
Right.
even if you just had Joe Schmo that walked up and said, I would like to see, oh, sure, let's see the Invisible Man. From the title, you know there's going to be an Invisible Man in some way, shape, or form, even if you haven't seen the trailer at all. Like that's just information the audience is already walking in with. So you can
Sure.
play off that and space and shoot this in a way that suggests that there's another person there, even if there's no like physical impact to the universe. Now, right once we get into, you know, the more mischievous acts or the actual fighting, that's different. That the action suggests and shows you that there's another person there. But even before that, it is shot to suggest that there's another person there, which I think is really brilliant. I mean, and they followed this to a T down to the fine details. There is a shot. I think it's when she's being interrogated.
Is it the rack focus?
They rack focus,
Yeah, they
and
do. That
I
was so elite. That was chef's kiss. When
yes,
yes, there's a scene where she's talking and it's almost it's like an over the shoulder of James
mm-hmm.
almost. And it's her and then the way in which it's spaced, the shot itself, you've got a decent amount of space above her.
Yeah,
And they rack focus where she becomes blurred and it's clear that they're focusing in on this empty space above her.
mm-hmm.
And that's clearly suggesting that he's right there.
Yeah,
But it's a rack focus. And the thing I wanted to mention is that the cinematographer does a lot of this heavy lifting of telling the story
yeah,
in a lot of ways.
really,
I mean, from the way in which it's shot, it's giving clues to the audience saying, hey, this is what's actually going on. And that's something that a lesser cinematographer wouldn't be able to do. And it
mm-hmm.
would have made a less effective product. But the way in which this movie is shot and clearly having somebody there and doing something like a rack focus, that's something that so easily somebody could have been like, we don't need to do that or
Mm-hmm.
not even think of it.
Right.
But the fact that they thought of it shows just the craft and the way in which they told the story and made sure that the audience was on Elizabeth Moss's side.
Yeah. I think this is just like a very like well executed piece of visual storytelling is the best way to describe it. Like this film is truly told and accentuated and elevated because of how it is told visually, from what the audience is shown, from how we're shown it. And you know, sometimes yes, all movies are visual storytelling, but sometimes that's not the case. Sometimes it just feels like you put the camera there and the actor is kind of just you recorded things happening. You didn't make the camera part of the story, but this truly brings the camera into the story and elevates the storytelling techniques. And I think that's probably the biggest success of this movie.
Right. Now, I will say this movie is not a perfect film. There are definitely some issues we have. We can get into that in Rosebud Thorn. But I will say, you and I both agree that there is a scene that we both have a real big issue with. The dog Zeus is still at Adrian's house when Elizabeth Moss's Ceceila character goes to try and deduce what the heck is going on. And she walks in the door and she's looking at this house, which is like almost too nice of a house to even live in. Like, I'd like to think that I could live there. And then I look at it thinking, with all those windows, everybody will see all the clothes on the floor. And everybody will see, you know, the trash I haven't taken out yet. You know, like
the things I stashed behind my bed to record the podcast.
Yeah.
My room isn't this clean all the time, folks.
Right. I mean, it's like when you were a kid and you would stuff everything. Man, kids, when we were kids, we were such idiots. You would stuff everything under the bed.
Yeah.
Right. And then your mom would come into your room and look under the bed and say, you didn't clean up anything. And now today I'd be like, why would you? There's so much dust under there. Why would you put your clothes under there? You know, that's like taking clean clothes and putting them on the floor. But when I was like 10, I didn't care that the clean clothes were on the floor. But now today, I'm like, that's like a simple tenet of living. Like you need to understand that the floor is not clean. The floor is never clean. So you can't. Anyway, laundry. I need to do laundry, actually. But she goes and the dog Zeus like walks up. She goes, "Oh, hey, Zeus." I'm thinking, why is the dog there?
Mm-hmm.
That quite literally, its owner is dead. You're just gonna leave it in the house? Like, this isn't like what are those pet movies?
Pet movies?
No, it's Illumination Entertainment. Second one has Harrison
Secret
Ford
Life of Pets.
Secret Life, yeah. This isn't Secret Life of Pets 3. Like, what? You can't leave a dog. Like, he's been dead for days. You can't leave a dog in there. What's the dog gonna do?
What's
the dog
the deal?
has no food. The dog can't go outside. What is the dog? Is the dog in the costume? Is the dog in? You know, what's the deal? And obviously, the dog needed to be there because Adrian was there, and so that gave credibility to the fact that Adrian was there. But come on, don't leave a dog. Don't leave. You know. Now, I could go into a whole story about my dad, who my dad had a dog. And my dad actually passed away, and the dog was still there because nobody else lived with my dad at the time. But they clearly knew that this dog was there, and they're like, yeah, sure, that's his house now. So, you know, you don't have a machine like Doc Brown. I'm just gonna, you know what? I'm gonna get off the high horse. Okay. But this is an important discussion.
See, I think
it's so important.
Okay, the dog did throw me for a loop at first. I think it's the first clue that it's Adrian. I think it really is. Because here's the thing. You mentioned before, like, once we realize there's a person in the suit, that makes them fallible. She ran away from him. So why would he ever think that she would come back to the house she ran away from? So why would he need to get rid of Zeus? But going back to find Zeus there, like, to me, like, in hindsight, like, that's the first clue. that like
Interesting.
this is actually a real person. I also
And I
want to
was
point
just, yeah,
out
I mean, I was just doing a rant to kind of be funny. And
it
you
was
actually have
funny.
some logic.
It
Oh,
was
thank you.
funny.
Yeah.
I also want to point out, just related because it's in that house, but when she goes in there, like she walks down the hall, it's like right before Zeus comes out, but we see like obviously everything's covered in plastic or in sheets and everything. I found it really interesting that there was like a chair or something, like a tall back chair that was covered in a white sheet. And in my mind, I saw that and I'm like, this is every stereotypical ghost costume for a kid that didn't have a Halloween costume and just cut two eye holes out of a white sheet, which
And
I found
honestly, if
like,
I were the parent, I'd be so pissed because you cut two eye holes in my sheet.
but I felt like for this movie about, is this a person? Is this a ghost? Like, what is this that's tormenting her? I thought that was, maybe it's not an intentional detail and I'm just seeing things, but I think it's intentional. And I thought that was cool.
That you may have just been seeing things, but the way in which you laid it out with intention actually sounds very cool. Yes. Could you imagine her just like having like a Batman utility belt with just a bunch of different cans of spray paint? Like that would be massive brain. Just
Yes.
and then you can prove right there. But I mean, this overall, this just is something that, eh, like, if I were in her position, I would feel so trapped. I would feel so trapped. So
Yeah.
the fact that she got out on the other end, in a little bit of a sketchy way, is testament, I guess, to uh, her her spirit.
Yeah.
Okay, now we are going to move on to Rosebud and Thorn. Jake, as always, I'm passing it off to you first. What are your Rosebud and Thorn for the Invisible Man?
Rose, I got three of them. First one, as I just spoke so much about the cinematography and how this is shot, it's going to go to the cinematography. I think visually is where this story succeeds the best. I mean, it's textbook. Like this is how you do cinematography at like the highest level.
I
So I
agree.
really enjoy that. So that gets Rose. Elizabeth Moss, obviously, so much of this movie rides on her and whether we believe like her performance. So I think I got to give Rose to her. I think she carries the movie very well. She does a good job there. So I'm going to give Rose to her, and I'm also going to give a rose to Oliver Jackson-Cohen, who plays Adrian. Um, when I found out that he was like actually the one in the green suit some of the time and gave her like someone to act off of, and plus his on-screen performance, I think it does really well. And you have to understand, in not a lot of screen time, you have to understand who this guy is and how um really diabolical, I guess you could say. Diabolical would be a good word for it. He is, and how obsessive and manipulative and controlling he is of Ceceila. So I think really without understanding that, the terror is not the same. Um, so I think I'm going to give a rose to him as well. Buds, I know you really like James as a character.
I like, well, and I also like Aldis Hodge as an actor.
Yeah, I think it's good performance. I just don't think he's given enough.
Okay.
Um, I think James and Emily, Emily being Cecilia's sister, those are both going to be my buds, just because she obviously has very close relationship with both of these, but we're thrust like just in this crisis moment, and so I don't feel like we fully understand like how close these people are. Like when
Mm.
when um when Adrian in the suit sends the email from Cecilia's account to Emily, like this just giant rant email, like telling her off that ruins their relationship. Like obviously, like yeah, I'm like, oh, that's pretty messed up. But I didn't understand how important. I didn't understand how important Emily was to Cecilia's character enough for that to mean as much as I thought it was supposed to. Does that make sense?
Right. I mean,
Um,
if you look at it, if you look at it, if they were really close, she should have been like, okay, this is a really weird email, but
yeah.
this doesn't sound like her.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it, but it, Yeah, you're absolutely right.
And then James too. I think James is a little better. He's given a little more to work with, but I still didn't understand like how, like why does, besides him being a cop, why does Ceceila go and live with him?
Because he's a
I,
vibe.
okay, yes, but like I
He's a legend.
like there's nothing given to like, and like they don't even
Right.
try
Yeah.
and explain it um
Yeah.
in a cheap way. So I felt like I was like, it would mean more if I understood like her relationships with these two other characters. Um Two very important characters, seemingly so to the story. So that was my bud. And then my thorn might just be me, because I really was frustrated once I found out that this was a real person, but then we find out that it was Tom, Adrian's brother, that gets
Mhm.
killed in the house that Cecelia kills. But then she's hung up on it's Adrian. Like this poses such a big question, I think, to the audience. That's not really. I don't know if it's really addressed that much. Like I think you're supposed to just like trust Cecelia that like no, it really was Adrian, and they got the wrong guy.
Mhm.
But really, when you look at this movie, there you can make an argument for either of them, that that it could have been, you know I think both things are plausible, both that Tom was the one in the suit, and that it was Adrian was the one in the suit. And I watched this with my roommate Tanner, and we had a big discussion afterwards about like, no, maybe it was him, no, I think it was him, no, I think, and it's just like, or maybe they both were in on it, and like there's all this kind of back and forth. And it frustrated me because the more I had that discussion, there weren't clues. There weren't enough clues that I could
Mhm.
figure out who it was. Um, and I felt like that kind of really left a bad taste in my mouth about this movie. As well done as I think it is, and it is a good movie. Don't get me wrong. I'm one that I like when there's a puzzle to be figured out. I like you to leave me enough
Enough clues.
breadcrumbs,
Yeah.
enough clues that I can sit there and put the Rubik's cube of a story together myself and be like, no, I think it's Adrian because this, and this. But I didn't have this, and this to go on. You know what I mean? And the same thing for
No.
Tom.
Yeah.
Like there was no way for me to argue. I just had to trust Cecelia, and it didn't do enough for me. I was like, no, I want, show me the little clues that even if it's only things that Cecelia saw, like let me see them too, so that way I know. You know what I mean?
Right.
That way,
Yeah.
like you, I feel like the ending's more satisfying then.
No, I think you're absolutely right. Yeah, that
So
makes a lot of sense. I think for me, I have a couple of roses. Cinematography is certainly one of them, and I also love the way the action sequences are shot too. I love that style of camera movement.
yeah,
So I think it was spectacular, truly. I will give a rose to Aldis Hodge because he's an absolute unit. I'm a big fan of his as an actor. He used to be in the show Leverage on TNT, and Drew Powell's. He wasn't a like he was a recurring character on
yeah.
there. So Aldis, I got a real big kick out of his character. I thought he was an absolute legend. Um, Elizabeth Moss gives a great performance as well. I really, I don't really have any buds or thorns on this one. I thoroughly enjoyed this, and I struggled to see how I'm willing, I guess, to give it the benefit of the doubt because I'm with you in that I do like the breadcrumbs. I felt there were enough, in my opinion, to be like, okay, that's clearly like the diazepam or whatever, the benzodiazepine. That's
Uh-huh.
what killed Michael Jackson or whatever. That that being in her system and seeing that bottle, that to me was like all the proof I needed that that was Adrian. But I also can understand where you're coming from. I guess that's something that I was like willing to kind of overlook, I guess. because I thoroughly, this is the best film we've watched in this
I would
series.
agree. I would agree.
Like heads and tails
Yeah.
above the other two. So I I don't really have any buds or thorns. Now we kind of are going to move. Kind of, we are going to move into who we think we are this week. Jake, I'm going to pass it off to you. Who do you think I am? Because I think I know who I am,
Okay.
but I don't know if you know who I am.
Okay. I I'm interested to hear who you say because I didn't really I struggled to come up with this. I'm gonna say you're James
Oh,
because
because he's a
um
legend. Because he's
um
him. Like Brock Purdy. Brock Purdy's him. Even after last week. Even after Sunday. He's him.
I don't know,
Continue,
like
Jake.
I just the fact that he was like willing, like in this moment of crisis, he was whether they were incredibly close or maybe not that close, like I said, we don't really get their relationship, their pre-existing relationship in this movie between Ceceila and James. But I mean, he's very willing and protective. He's willing to take in Ceceila and help her get back on her feet. And I feel like you're the kind of person that like I feel like I would you would be someone I would call if I needed help getting back on my feet, or like I was just like I have nowhere to go. Like I definitely feel like you would be willing to lend a hand. So
I
um
appreciate that.
I know I usually roast you on these who we are, but um I'm not gonna say you're a psycho murderer or
See,
tormentor.
I'm gonna roast myself a little.
Please do.
Because
Please do.
I am clearly Cecilia. And you are clearly James in my
Okay.
eyes. And the reason why is because especially I I'm not like, oh, I think things are there that aren't there. But I read into things a lot.
Okay.
Like a lot. I read into things. And sometimes there's nothing to be read into. Other times there is something to be read into. But you're usually the one being like, you crazy, calm down. She'll text you back. Because it's usually about girls, let's be honest. No, even in the job search, right? The rules of getting a job are different than they were, and especially service industry as opposed to not service industry.
No.
So I automatically jump to conclusions. I'm like a kangaroo. I just jump. I just jump to conclusion to conclusion to conclusion. I'm also Australian. I don't know if you knew that. I'm not Australian. I've been to Outback. That's the closest thing to Australia I've done. But I jump to these conclusions, and I always call you, and you're always like, "Calm down. It's like not that big a deal. She'll text you back, whatever. They'll email you back." And sure enough, a lot of times you're right. So you kind of put up with my tomfoolery, my brain tomfoolery. Uh, you can coin that term. Just give me the
Brain
royalties.
tomfoolery.
That so I don't know. I definitely saw you as James and myself as Cecilia. Because if there was an invisible man, one, it probably would be attacking me out of the two
Yeah,
of
it
us.
would. It would.
It would. And I'd be like, Jake, there's an invisible man after me. And Jake would be like, how many pills did you take? And I would say, I'm sober. And he goes, what do you think sober means? Because you're not sober. There's clearly something going on.
Uh,
Uh, but now we're going to move into some final thoughts. Jake, what are your final thoughts on this first watch of The Invisible Man?
Final thoughts. I really enjoyed this movie. It's one I wasn't sure how much I was going to enjoy it going in, but you talked it up really big, and I think it follows through on everything you said. So I think just visually, it's stunning the way it's shot. Just really tells the story insanely well. So I really appreciated that. And yeah, it's just the like I said, it left me a little unsatisfied at the end because I wanted a few more clues to like I could make an argument. And honestly, like if there would have been clues to both sides, I would have been okay with that as well. But I wish there would have been enough clues to make an argument either way. But that's just me. I enjoy those kind of movies. So and you know, maybe that's not what this is at the end of the day, and that's okay. But yeah, I definitely recommend it, and I would agree with you. This is the best movie we've watched so far in this series.
Yeah, I very much enjoyed this. I know I purchased this and have seen it a few times, and I'm really glad I did so. I think cinematography, especially, I am so impressed with. It's one of the best cinematography jobs I've seen in a while. Like, it's one of the best shot films I've seen in a while. Now I've seen a lot of crappy films, but it's one of the best I've seen in a while. Overall, I think the story's compelling. I like the modern angle to it. I like that it kind of veers a little bit from the supernatural more into the technological. I think the performances are really good. I like the score.
You
The
always like the
color.
score.
I even like the color grading on this. I love when they're in kind of the white sterile facility.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of like the look of that. Not
Yeah.
like I like the look at it as I need to be in one of those places. I like the look of it as just
You
in
don't
the context of the film.
you don't want a white wall grippy sock vacation.
No, no. The only padding I need is on a bed, not on the walls. And I started. That Michael Scott meme where it's like, okay, I sometimes I start a sentence, I don't even know where it's going. That's what that was right there. I started with the padding because I was like, okay, padded walls. How
What
am I
else
going to
is
pull that
padded?
off?
What else is padded?
How am I going to pad that? Uh, so I really thoroughly enjoyed this, and I agree. I agree with myself. I think this is the best film we've seen so far. But the question is for you folks: have you seen The Invisible Man from 2020? Did you like it? Did you not? Are you hoping they do more kind of monster movies in this vein? Let us know your thoughts, your review, Rosebud and Thorn, everything in the comments down below. We love hearing from you. If you like this video, hit that like button and ring that bell with the subscribe button to get all notifications on upcoming content. What are we talking about next week, Jake?
Next week we are going to take a bit of a left turn and go to a monster comedy.
A monster comedy.
Yes, for Young Frankenstein.
Yes, with Gene Wilder. That's a Mel Brooks.
It is. It is Mel Brooks.
Yeah, Mel Brooks is a unit.
Yeah.
So make sure to check back next week. We're going to be talking that. Also, follow us on social media. Follow Jake, myself, and the Cinefile. You see all the links right there. But until next time, for Jake Biller, I'm Ben Sparrow. Thanks so much for watching the Cinefile. We'll see you back here next week. And cut.